In the 19th century, if you stood on the roof of a tall building in New York, Boston, or San Francisco, you might have seen something strange rising above the skyline. Not a church spire, not a smokestack, a tower made of iron, sometimes wood, sometimes braced with cables. At the very top, a cluster of long mechanical arms and rotating boards, strange shapes that looked almost like oversized clock hands frozen in mid-motion. They were called signal towers, and for several decades they stood in the center of nearly every major American city. The system that operated them was known as the fire alarm telegraph. It was first implemented in the United States in 1852 by William F. Channing and engineer Moses G. Farmer in Boston. Their design connected alarm boxes across the city to a central station through telegraph wires. When an alarm box was activated, a coded electrical signal traveled through the network. That signal reached the central station, and then something unusual happened. The signal was displayed physically, on towers visible across the city. The most famous of these installations appeared in New York City during the 1870s. Atop municipal buildings and fire headquarters, large mechanical indicators displayed numbers corresponding to alarm box locations. These numbers were not small, they were enormous. Rotating panels or semaphore arms would swing into position, forming visible codes that could be read from miles away by firefighters positioned across the city. The concept was simple, a visual broadcast system. Before radio, before widespread telephone access, before modern dispatch systems, if a fire broke out on the Lower East Side, the signal tower would physically announce the location to the entire skyline. Fire companies would look up, read the code, respond. Contemporary photographs confirm their presence, tall iron frameworks rising above fire department buildings, complex mechanical shapes mounted at the top. Some resembled giant directional arrows. Others looked almost like skeletal windmills. Newspapers from the 1870s described crowds watching the towers rotate during large fires. The system became a point of civic pride, an early example of electrical infrastructure transforming urban life. Cities adopted the design rapidly. Boston had them, New York had them, Philadelphia, Chicago, Baltimore, San Francisco. In official documents preserved by the National Fire Protection Association and municipal archives, the signal towers are described as practical devices, part of the evolving fire alarm telegraph network spreading across American cities in the late 19th century. Nothing mysterious, just infrastructure. But when you begin to look for them today, something curious happens. They are gone. Not replaced, not repurposed, removed, almost entirely. The towers that once stood above central fire stations and municipal buildings vanished quietly during the early 20th century. In most cities, the structures were dismantled between roughly 1900 and 2025. The official reason seems straightforward. Technology improved. Telephone dispatch systems replaced visual alarms. Firehouses could now receive alerts directly through wired connections. Operators no longer needed to scan rooftops for mechanical signals. The towers had become obsolete, so they were taken down. On paper, the explanation makes perfect sense. Cities modernize constantly. Infrastructure appears, serves its purpose, and disappears. Gas lamps give way to electric lighting. Horse stables become garages. Telegraph poles become fiber networks. But the signal towers leave behind a small puzzle. For structures that once stood in the heart of major cities, sometimes 40 or 50 feet tall, they left surprisingly little documentation of their removal. No large demolition projects, no public debate, no ceremonial retirement, just quiet disappearance. In many historical photographs from the 1880s and 1890s, the towers are clearly visible above rooftops, yet by the 20th century, the same buildings appear without them. The skyline changed, and few people seem to notice. Perhaps that is the nature of infrastructure. The more practical it is, the less attention it receives. It performs its function quietly and vanishes the same way. Still, the signal towers had once been prominent enough to define entire city blocks. Their mechanical arms were visible for miles. Firefighters depended on them. Citizens watched them. Newspapers described them. And yet today, outside specialist archives, most people have never heard of them. Maybe that is normal. Maybe thousands of urban technologies have disappeared the same way. Or maybe these towers were more significant than we remember. Because the deeper you look into the records, the stranger the pattern becomes. Not only were the towers removed, they were removed almost everywhere, within the same generation, and very few physical traces remain of how they once dominated the skyline.
Once you begin searching historical photographs of American cities before 1900, the signal towers appear again and again. They rise above rooftops like skeletal antennas, tall frameworks, angular arms, sometimes with multiple moving indicators mounted at the top. In Boston, early fire alarm towers were attached to municipal buildings, allowing firefighters across neighborhoods to read coded signals during emergencies. The system spread rapidly after its success in the 1850s. By the 1870s, similar towers stood in Chicago, then Philadelphia, then Baltimore. Even on the West Coast, rapidly growing cities like San Francisco integrated visual signal towers into their fire alarm telegraph networks. The principle remained consistent. A coded electrical pulse traveled through underground wires when someone pulled a street alarm box. At the central station, the signal was decoded, then the tower activated. Mechanical indicators rotated into place, displaying a number visible across long distances. Each number corresponded to a specific alarm box location. The entire system relied on visibility. Firefighters stationed across the city would simply look up. If they saw their assigned district number, they moved. No telephone required, no messenger needed. It was a hybrid technology, part electrical telegraph, part mechanical broadcasting system. And it worked remarkably well. Municipal reports from the late 19th century describe response times improving dramatically after the towers were installed. Fires were located faster, dispatch confusion dropped. Cities invested heavily in expanding the networks. Alarm boxes multiplied, wires spread underground, central stations grew more complex. But something interesting happened as the system matured. The towers themselves began to matter less. Inside firehouses, dedicated telegraph receivers started appearing. Instead of reading signals from rooftops, firefighters could hear coded bells or see smaller mechanical indicators directly inside their stations. The information was the same, just delivered more privately. This shift happened gradually. Interior receivers, telephone lines, direct dispatch, one layer of communication after another, and eventually the skyline indicators, the towers themselves, became redundant. The official record frames their removal as a natural technological transition. Obsolete equipment dismantled, space reclaimed, no mystery required. But the pattern of removal is unusually synchronized. Between roughly 1900 and 1920, signal towers disappeared from nearly every major American city. Boston dismantled several. New York removed theirs. Chicago followed. Baltimore, Philadelphia, San Francisco. Different municipalities, different administrations, yet the same result. Tower frameworks that once defined central fire stations simply vanished from rooftops. In some cases, small notes appear in municipal engineering reports describing their removal. In others, there is no formal mention at all. Photographs provide the clearest evidence. A building photographed in 1895 shows a towering signal frame. The same building photographed in 1915 does not. It is simply gone. Metal dismantled, mountings removed, no visible trace left behind. Perhaps that level of quiet disappearance is normal for infrastructure. Cities remove water towers, telegraph poles, rail spurs.
Most leave little ceremony behind. Still, the towers raise an unusual question. They were designed to broadcast information publicly across the entire skyline. Anyone could read them. Firefighters, certainly, but also civilians, shop owners, dock workers, newspaper reporters. The location of a major fire became immediately visible to anyone who looked upward. It was a civic signal, shared knowledge. When the towers disappeared, that visibility vanished as well. Fire information moved indoors, into dispatch rooms, into telephone networks, into controlled channels. That transition makes sense technologically. Faster communication, fewer delays, greater precision. But historians occasionally note the symbolic shift. Urban information, once displayed publicly, now circulated through closed systems. Most people never noticed the change. A small number of researchers, however, have occasionally wondered about the towers themselves. Not in the mainstream history of firefighting, where they remain a minor footnote, but in fringe corners of architectural history and speculative research. One suggestion, rarely taken seriously, proposes that some of the signal towers may have been repurposed earlier structures, possibly adapted from older urban observation frameworks dating back to the 18th century. There is little evidence supporting that claim. Most surviving engineering diagrams clearly show the towers being constructed alongside fire alarm telegraph systems in the mid-1800s. The simplest explanation remains the strongest. They were built for fire signaling. They became obsolete. They were removed. Still, when you review the photographs from the era, something about them feels oddly monumental for a technology that lasted barely half a century. Heavy iron frameworks, large mechanical displays, structures tall enough to dominate municipal rooftops, and then, within a single generation, they vanished from the skyline entirely. No preserved examples in major cities, no reconstructed replicas, just a scattering of photographs and technical diagrams in archives. A communication network once designed to be seen by everyone, now remembered by almost no one.
Cities are built in layers. Each generation leaves behind structures that once seemed essential. Water towers, telegraph lines, elevated railways, gas street lamps. Some survive long enough to become historic landmarks. Others vanish so completely that later generations never realize they existed. The signal towers occupy a strange place in that pattern. They were once highly visible, designed specifically to be seen from miles away. Mechanical beacons rising above municipal buildings in the busiest districts of American cities. And yet their physical traces are almost entirely gone. Part of the explanation lies in their materials. Most towers were constructed from iron frameworks bolted to rooftops rather than embedded into building foundations. When they were dismantled, the metal could be recycled easily, the mounting points patched, the roofline restored. A removal that left little archaeological footprint. But another reason may be cultural. Infrastructure that becomes obsolete often disappears quietly because it no longer carries meaning. Once the function is gone, the structure feels unnecessary. Few people felt nostalgic about mechanical fire signal towers once telephones and direct dispatch systems took over. They were simply outdated equipment. Still, their disappearance reflects a deeper transformation in how cities communicate information. The signal towers broadcast emergencies to everyone at once. They turned the skyline into a shared message board. Anyone who understood the code could interpret the signal. When the system moved indoors, to telephones, switchboards, and eventually radio, those signals became selective, controlled, directed to specific recipients. Public awareness shifted from observation to mediation. Citizens no longer read the city directly. They heard about it later, through newspapers, through radio, through official reports. Maybe that transition was inevitable. Technological efficiency tends to favor systems that move faster and reach specific audiences. Public displays are often replaced by private channels. But sometimes the skyline remembers things even after the structures are gone. If you study late 19th century city photographs carefully, the towers appear unexpectedly, rising behind courthouse domes, fire headquarters, or municipal buildings, thin metal silhouettes cutting into the sky. Once you know what they are, you begin seeing them everywhere. Then suddenly, nowhere. Architecture occasionally preserves ghost outlines of removed structures, roof reinforcements where towers once stood, odd brackets along masonry walls, small anomalies that suggest something heavier once occupied the space, evidence without explanation. Or perhaps explanation simply faded from common memory. Fire departments themselves still preserve fragments of the system. Alarm box networks survived into the 20th century. Some cities maintained street alarm boxes well into the 1970s. But the towers, the most visible part of the system, were dismantled long before most modern residents were born. Maybe I'm connecting dots that were never meant to touch. After all, the historical record does exist. Engineering journals, municipal reports, and firefighting histories all describe the signal towers clearly enough. Their purpose is not secret. What feels unusual is not their existence, it is their disappearance. A skyline technology that once stood in nearly every major American city, gone within a generation, leaving behind photographs that look strangely modern and strangely ancient at the same time, mechanical structures reaching upward as if waiting to transmit something, or perhaps waiting to be read. Today, when people look across city skylines, they see communication towers everywhere, radio antennas, cellular arrays, satellite dishes. Signals still travel invisibly above the rooftops, but the old system worked differently. It made the signal visible, mechanical, public. You looked up and saw the message moving in the sky. And for a brief period in the 19th century, that message could be read by anyone who knew where to look, until the towers were taken down, one by one, and the skyline went quiet again.